Welcome to Sustainability Now, an exploration of technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. Designed for socially conscious entrepreneurs and individuals interested in responsible stewardship of the planet. Sustainability Now covers food, energy, housing, water, waste, health, economics, and consciousness. Welcome to your community, Sustainability Now, with your host, Mira Rubin.
Welcome, everybody, to Sustainability Now, technologies and paradigms to shape a world that works. I'm your host, Mira Rubin, and I am delighted to introduce you to Tim Paganos. With more than 25 years of developing data-driven applications for banking, healthcare, retail, and manufacturing companies, Tim is co-founder and chief technology officer at microshare.io. Microshare combines wireless data sources to support sustainable practices while respecting individual privacy. Microshare's universal contact tracing solution has been adopted globally as the centerpiece of comprehensive COVID-19 responses. So normally here at Sustainability Now, we conduct a pre-interview to sketch out the context for the interview itself. But in this case, the conversation between myself and Tim was so compelling that we decided just to run with it. So let's dive right into the conversation that's already underway. Enjoy.
Cool.
I don't even know what you do yet exactly, but it sounds like your company is Internet of Things based. And go ahead, tell me more about that.
Yeah, no, that's right. So, I think from a sustainability perspective, it's really about using data to manage your spaces more productively. And what do I mean by that? I mean, ultimately, it's balancing the resource consumption with the wellness and comfort of the occupants, and keeping those two things in balance using data, using information. A good example of that is, I might like to keep turning the thermostat down on my family to be more and more fuel efficient, but at some point it reaches a tipping point where they're too cold, too uncomfortable, and it becomes a detractor, to their well-being. The same things happen, and we specialize mostly in the built environments in commerce, right? So workplaces, broadly defined, right? These could be office buildings, but often they're, factories or airports or prisons, oddly enough, places where people, kind of non-residential spaces, I guess I would call them. And, you're ultimately trying to get people to be able to collaborate and accomplish something in these spaces. So the space needs to support that, but at the same time, needs to be done sustainably, right? What does sustainability mean there? It means environmental consciousness. It means social consciousness. It means transparency from a governance perspective. And our mission ultimately is to use real data about the space to make these decisions, because with a small space, you'll find you probably manage your home's thermostat pretty well. And if I'm the office manager of a, let's say, 20,000 square foot office space, I probably get by pretty well. I know when people are in the office, I know when they're not. And even if I had to manually turn the thermostats up and down and shut the lights on and off, I probably can do that. But if you explode that, and now there's 20 buildings in 10 different geographies and time zones, and you have complex environments like an airport with people coming and going at all kinds of times. When can you turn the lights off? When can you turn the heat down? When can you clean? When shouldn't you clean?
So I have a couple
Yeah.
questions, and I have one burning controversial question that I have to
Yeah,
ask, which
like
is
it.
about 5G.
Okay.
Because my understanding is that 5G is what is going to enable IoT, Internet of Things, to communicate, right? And there's been a lot of controversy over 5G and the proximity and intensity.
Yep.
And so what's the response to that?
Yeah. So, 5G has a particular place in the market. It isn't the be all and end all of IoT by any means. I think it's being heavily hyped as being that, solution to all things. We actually don't use, 3G, 4G, 5G, high
Perfect.
bandwidth technology at
Perfect.
all.
Okay,
Yep.
good.
Yep.
Good.
So we tend to use a technology that's low bandwidth, which means broad wavelength, low energy frequency radio, which has been around forever.
Okay.
Um,
That's
and
reassuring.
yeah, and the good thing about it is that it, although it doesn't transmit a lot of data, you can't use it for video or audio or anything like that, like you can with like even Wi-Fi, but it goes a long way. So we can take a little device like this. This is a little occupancy sensor. This guy will broadcast whether or not somebody's sitting at a desk or entering a room for about 5 years on a battery and can be picked up as far as like 6 miles away.
Wow.
So we don't need a lot of infrastructure to be able to deploy a sensing environment pretty efficiently.
Okay, so now then another controversial question is, what distinguishes that from surveillance?
Sure. Well, at the end of the day, it doesn't, right? Surveillance is kind of the negative word to use for it, but in practical terms, that's what it is, right? We are surveilling spaces in different ways. Now,
Well, but you're not just surveilling spaces, you're surveilling people in spaces.
that's right.
To be able
Absolutely
to,
right.
yeah.
Absolutely right. Because at the end of the day, it's not about the space, it is about the people, from our perspective, because the space without the people is somewhat pointless in the way that we think about the problem we're trying to solve. So our solution to that is radical transparency. Because the reality is data is not going away. Nobody's going to stuff that genie back in the bottle. And what I want to be able to do is to recognize that the data we collect about people is only dangerous when those people don't have visibility into what that data is and how it's being used, and then give people some control over that. So that's been our gestalt, is to say, all of the data that flows through our system has multiple owners. So if you sit at this desk and this sensor is on this desk, then I know that not only does the employer who bought the desk and employed the sensor, they own the data about you being there, but you also own that data. So we mark that data as being belongs to Mira and belongs to Comcast or whatever.
So I'm just listening into what you're saying, and
Sure.
I got this knot in my stomach, because
Okay.
what I'm hearing is then my employer knows whether I'm at my desk, whether I'm not at my desk,
Sure.
and can pull reports. I'm presuming is that data is, especially if it's tagged with my name, then I am really truly being surveilled. My behavior
Sure.
is being monitored,
Absolutely.
and very closely so.
Yep. And it is already, all right. So if you've been in and out of an office building in the last 10 years, you've noticed the badges and you've noticed the conference rooms all have these things stuck to the ceilings. The reality is all of this is already being done. The employer completely knows when you're in the office, where you are, in which part. They know, at least in general terms, where people are. And in many ways, those are being used for sustainable purposes as well. They use, this information to turn off the lights in conference rooms when people aren't there and things like that. But all that data is already being collected. So there's nothing that we're doing that is adding, but the difference
It
is,
sounds like there's a degree. Like if it's on my desk,
sure,
you're monitoring me intimately.
that's true. So, the difference between monitoring the general room and monitoring the desk is a nuance for sure. We also do contact tracing, for instance, for the COVID. So that's been very big in 2020. So, typically you're wearing a bracelet in a factory setting that allows you to know who you've been in contact with, used for contact tracing.
I have to ask you, Tim, don't you see like some really dystopian
Sure.
concerns around this?
Absolutely. Um, and the answer is, I think, not going back to the Stone Ages and pretend that you aren't being surveilled. The answer is to make it obvious, clear, and controllable by individuals. So my approach to that aspect of cultural sustainability is to put the control back into the end user's hands. But the reality is there are cameras and microphones and sensing devices all around us already. You carry one in your pocket, most likely. Maybe you don't, but most of us do. And all of this information is already collected, but the difference is you don't know about it. You can't control it. You have very limited visibility and very limited control. So what we want to do is say, look, all right, we know the data is going to be collected. And by the way, I believe thoroughly that the world will be a better place if the data is available. Because closing our eyes to it as we expand.
So tell me how the world's going to be a better place with the data being collected.
Because humans make pretty poor decisions intuitively. I think, psychologically that's true, and I think time has borne that out. People don't make good systemic decisions just kind of thinking about the world.
I'm going to beg to differ with you. I think intuitively people make good decisions. Rationally, logically, people don't. I make a distinction.
And that's fair. I think it is the logical, rational aspect I'm talking about.
That's what's gotten us into trouble. And that's also what I see is data is uber rational.
It is uber rational and needs to transcend the individual's ability to grasp the data in order to move beyond the limitations of the human mind to be that kind of rational, which means, frankly, artificial intelligence. But artificial intelligence is only as good as the quality of the information it receives, which I think has been one of the big detractors to AI today, is they bear the biases of what we measure and how, because we feed it what we've got. And if we want AI to be better, more rational tools to kind of supplement that intuitive aspect of what humans are good at, which I think really means about addressing scale, right? So again, it's not about your house. I think you probably have a decent intuition and can rationalize about something that is that big. But if you're a multinational corporation with millions of square feet of space and tens of thousands of employees, the individuals don't do a great job at balancing those things. And there's plenty of stories to go around about that. So I think ultimately what we want to be able to do is feed analytic tools that use the humans to inform it, but has more generic but detailed data that feed them to support decision making, and wherever we can to actually remove the human from the actuation loop, right? So
you're
know when to turn.
You're talking about automating buildings.
Yeah, smart buildings, at the end of the day.
Okay, so the thing that I have a question about, I think that this is a really, really important civil liberties issue.
I agree.
And I'm thinking that the granularity is where the danger comes. When it is identified with an individual, when there's monitoring on somebody's desk, that is dangerous, in my opinion. Yep. Because it is individual, it is specific, and it's one thing to collect data that can be synthesized to create an overall environment. It's another one that surveils. There is a distinction where, to me, at least in my head, maybe I'm not using the right words, but there's a huge distinction of a violation of privacy and individuality and going down that dangerous road, I think.
I agree with you up to the point of what you do about it. Until that point, I agree completely with you. I think individual liberties are paramount. I am a dyed-in-the-wool classic liberal libertarian. I don't believe that individual freedom should be impinged in any way. At the same time, I really believe in data sustainability and the ability of AI to do better for humanity as we grow. Because I think the challenges of scale, of sustainability at scale, are just beyond us as individuals. Not beyond us to care about it, but beyond us to act quickly, broadly, and accurately to address the problems we've got and the problems we continue to exacerbate. So that's the framework.
We really haven't talked about any specifics. Yeah,
Sure.
I mean, it's kind of general.
Yeah.
So I still don't know exactly what your company does. I mean, I
Okay.
gather that you connect
Sure.
or connect and collect, or collect and collate data.
Yep.
Are you also part of the automation system that automates the
Yes.
atmospheric conditions?
Yep. So there are a lot of different devices that measure a lot of different things. And we don't build our own sensors. There's a very big network of people who do nothing but that. And you can get sensors that measure everything you can imagine in the physical world. And the reality is there's really only about 25 things that are possible to measure about the physical world. And you really only care about a small handful of those things. So there's a bunch of exotic stuff, but for the most part, we're talking about things like temperature and humidity, noise, vibrations, presence, movement, light levels, these kind of things that are, representative, I think, what even a human would notice if you're sitting in a space. What does my environment look and feel like? Sensors basically can manage and measure that kind of stuff. So what we've done is created a system where you can take a bunch of different types of sensors and different form factors from different vendors and plug them into a system that allows us to collect all of these through these low bandwidth networks that I talked about, and bring that data together in a way that respects multiple owners. So has that framework about Mira owns this data as well as her employer owns that data. So that's fundamental to, in fact, that's our patent pending, is around that idea. So that's our core intellectual property. We take the data from all these different sensors, put them together, and most importantly, standardize the data, because these things spit out information in all different ways. It's ridiculous. Almost every vendor of these machines makes a temperature sensor, right? It's just like simplest thing you could possibly measure. None of them look the same. All the data looks different. So, if I stick these up in my building and you stick a different one up and you say, well, these are just thermometers at the end of the day, well, what's the big deal? Well, they all spit the data out in different ways. You try to stick the data back together to make bigger decisions. It turns into this really big problem. So what we've done is said, look, let's break that barrier down, allow you to put up sensors from almost any of these vendors so you can kind of pick and choose. By the way, we pre-certify and pick and try to help find vendors that do this really well, but you're welcome to go out and pick your own, or maybe you already have your own. But we try to make the data all look the same so that you can start mixing and matching them, because it's really at scale that the problem gets really complex and has the greatest opportunity to yield, real benefit. It's at the scale. So it's taking, multiple sensors, bringing it all together. So for instance, if you've got a temperature sensor in the room and you've got an occupancy sensor in the room, then not only do I know what the HVAC system is doing in terms of keeping cooling or heating that space, but I also know if people are in that room. And there are sensors that do both, but they're actually more expensive than two sensors like this that you can stick up to do both. But you need the insight of both of those things in order to make a good decision about whether to change the heating and cooling properties of that room. Are people going to use it? Are they in it now? Are they likely to be in it based on past behavior, right? So once I can collect an occupancy pattern of an office space, you can begin to start making predictions to say, well, on Wednesdays, usually people go home at 5 p.m. So we should start, cooling the office at that time. But, on Thursdays, people stay late. So, don't cool at 5 p.m., keep it till 8. Or, maybe there's 2 shifts. There's things you can learn about a space by measuring and comparing both that temperature and that occupancy data. And then you can compare things like light levels too, right? Does the lights need to be on in that room? Maybe it makes sense to keep the heat on because someone's likely to use it in the next hour. So you don't want to drop and have to raise the heat, but let's turn the lights off for the next hour because a human can come along and turn it on again. So you add sort of light and sound to that mix potentially. And the idea is that you can use basically this artificial sensorium, right? Basically all the things that a human could perceive about your space, and then get the biggest picture of the whole kind of built space organization across departments, across functions, across space types, across time zones, and be able to make good decisions about them on one hand, and then begin to automate, actually having the systems adjust themselves based on what the data suggests is the optimal pattern for these things.
I'm understanding that really what you're doing is collecting and collating data. Is that primarily the function that you guys serve?
Yep, that's the main mission. Exactly right.
And then you're not actually creating the hardware that is the sensors or that is the automation itself.
That's right.
You're more the data collation.
That's right. It's the network that gets all the data into one place, and then the tools that make all the data look the same so that you can use them.
Interpret it.
Exactly right.
So now, is that data interpreted manually by humans, or is that data then presented to some kind of organizational software that is like a controller software?
Yeah. In the end, there's a bunch of different consumers. And so the general kind of customer journey is people need to see the data themselves before they believe it, right? So when most people put these in, they want to see like graphs, and they want to match what they're seeing to their intuition and say, well, that's weird. Why is there people on a Wednesday night in this space? They're supposed to go home at 6. Do I believe that there's somebody there at midnight? And then they go and they go look, and they're like, oh, well, it turns out the cleaning crew goes and has their break there. I didn't know that because I'm not there at midnight. And okay, well that kind of makes sense. So they need to see the data the humans do first. So we show them graphs and dashboards and reports, as you said. But what you really want to be able to do is then transcend the reports, because at the end of the day, humans don't want to run their businesses by graphs. Right? I don't want to manage the building every day by looking at a graph and like, all right, where should I turn the heat up or down? So it's the next step then is automating. And a lot of these buildings already have, certainly office buildings in the West already have automated systems that can turn lights on and off and heat up and down and these things. So then it's taking the data and integrating that into the building systems themselves so that the building can start responding to the information, both on a predictive basis and on an instant basis. Because maybe you show up in the office, randomly, you got to pull an all-nighter to get something done, or maybe a flight is late coming in to the airport, and that's not usual, but people are there in the space, and so the building has to react in that sort of just-in-time way to keep people comfortable. So you need both that historical and that just-in-time kind of immediate response. So you want that automated ultimately so that humans can see what's happening. They see the response, but it's not up to them to, twiddle the dials and flip the switches over time. But then I think one of the key things is now showing them the complete system of how this works, how the data shows how space is being used, how the systems are responding, so that people then can make bigger strategic decisions. So which of your building systems are running efficiently, right? Not all boilers can respond as quickly as others, right? So maybe there's a space where you think you've got a smart building already, but what you find is people come in and out of that space and the boiler can't keep up. So you fired up the boiler and it's pushing lots of hot air and you only spent 2 hours and you left and it didn't make a degree's worth of difference while you were there. Well, okay, well, what does that mean about my long-term sustainability stance? Should I maybe move your activity to a building that's better able to respond? Or should I invest in upgrading the building systems in that building so that it's more able to address it? That's where granularity gets really important. Although it might feel creepy individually, it matters to who's really there, what you're trying to do, what your intent is. That allows people to say, oh, I didn't realize that Mira has this work pattern where she's got to come in at midnight on Wednesday because that's when, somebody else works in Tokyo and you two are collaborating, and I've got you in an office space that is 58 degrees and you're shivering. And that individual information can then be used to say, actually, maybe what I need to do is offer Mira more IT support from home. So she doesn't need to come to this office to have this video link to because I think that's the new modern world, is a blended experience of space. It's not just the airport, the office, the hospital. It's, your home, it's your car, it's the coffee shop. It's, an expanded idea of where we're all working. And, what we're seeing is that employers and vendors of space, right? Building owners, or, a WeWork, for instance, which is, some kind of weird blend in between. They're trying to offer people these more flexible arrangements, which also happen to be generally more cost effective and more resource effective over time. And I think if done properly, also give people better experience of their life, right? Because
so I'm trying to get a sense of what your company looks like. It sounds like you're a consultancy.
A lot of it, at the end of the day, you do have to help people interpret the data, but we really are a data service. So that's the core of what we do.
And so you're not actually helping with the implementation.
We try not to. So
you make implementation recommendations?
We do, and what we're trying to do really is expand that aspect by a partnership. Because there are people who do this, from a consultancy perspective. They've got the expertise in buildings and sustainability and, cost savings and all the, the whole 9 yards, employee productivity, wellness, etc. What we want to do is try to arm them with good, consistent information, and then let them help organizations respond better. And necessarily we get involved in that, particularly when we encounter a new use case or a new system or a new problem that we're dealing with. We do get involved, but our goal really is to populate the existing ecosystem rather than be necessarily the intellectual driver behind all that. Because
how did you get into this?
Yeah. We sort of, I've always been a technologist, so I'll say that. So data has always been sort of part of my engineering toolkit. And early in my career, spent a lot of time building kind of software for big banks, big insurance, financial type companies, which have been data oriented from the start. Because when you think about a bank, there's really nothing other than pens and data. That's really all they do, right? The rest is just a facade, right? Marble facade over top of data. So they've been very early in some of this journey of data management, because at the end of the day, that's what they do. And banks are what they are, right? It's not a super sexy thing to, frankly, spend your life writing banking software. So what I wanted to do was After I did my last stint, our last startup was bought by Accenture. Do you know Accenture at all? They're the largest technology consultancy in the world. I think that's still true. Like 1 million people employed globally.
Wow.
When we got bought by them in 2010, I was like employee 260,000 and XXXY.
Wow.
Before I left 2 years later, it was already 600,000 and something else. And they've just continued to expand. So they've got just armies of consultants, basically, who satisfy, mostly enterprise level, right? So big companies they serve. And they do 10 projects that are tens of millions of dollars around data at the end of the day. It's big computer systems, data of various kinds, and really rocket sciencey level kind of stuff. AI, data collection, big systems, cloud, all that stuff. What I wanted to do was to say, companies can get a lot of value out of this stuff, but not everybody is going to spend $50 million to have Accenture do it for you. So can we take some of these really high-tech ideas and democratize them? Can we take them and make them broadly applicable? Because a lot of the damage being done and a lot of the value that can be had exists at a much lower level down. It's not, JP Morgan Chase that needs to do better. It's, Tyson Foods. And from the outside, you might say, well, what's the difference between the two? I can tell you, Tyson Food doesn't spend tens of millions of dollars on data projects. They cut chicken faster, right? That's what they do. But if we could democratize these tools, we could begin to drive that data-driven value further down the chain and impact bigger and bigger sections of the economy. Because I think that's the key to trying to drive better decision-making at scale. And I think that's critical to sustainability long-term, is driving these high-tech tools out of the elite tens of millions of dollar projects and down, ultimately, I think in the long run, into individuals' hands as well.
What kind of results have you seen in terms of having this information, and what kind of transformation takes place?
Yeah, so it's early on, but it's not unusual to find that people can cut sort of energy consumption by 30% just by managing their buildings better. And I can tell you that the people who own those buildings think of that as money, and I think of that as fuel saved. And that's kind of table stakes for an office building, and it's just managing heating and cooling, and it's managing lighting in a better way. And what we see is that people can actually improve the experience of the individuals who use that space.
Do you have data on that too?
Yeah, absolutely. That's harder to track, right? It's harder to measure. So one of the key things we put out is feedback devices. So just as important as measuring, it's like, how do you feel about it?
Exactly. Yeah.
Are you comfortable? You're not comfortable? So we usually deploy these things collectively, so we can see how humans are responding to that. A little harder to measure, right? It's not quite a physical thing. You're dealing with layers, but we do believe that we see evidence of increased comfort, and working with people who deal with productivity, you can start to see that reflected in the productivity numbers. And those are things that are even harder to measure. Like, how do you measure productivity of a particular job? Well, there's an art to that too, which is again why consultants who do nothing but that are great to employ at that. And sometimes you only see that accrue after you've looked at years. But it's pretty well established that comfort level, the ideal comfort range for the productivity is fairly well known. And the goal ultimately is to optimize that, for all the individuals and all the different ways they work. And if you can optimize that, then, we'll see the productivity numbers over time reflect that, I believe. And in the short term, we can see energy use go down. But one of the key things I think is, I also believe that's just the entry for sustainability, because what is really scarce and also really dangerous environmentally is misusing space. Because, we might move to green energy, and we might be able to harvest all the heat energy we need from the sun over time. I believe that's coming. Will it, is it a little too late? Maybe, but it's happening, and it will happen, and I want to continue to support that. But if you fast forward 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, I hope it's not that far, but as far as you need to fast forward, eventually maybe we'll care less about whether the lights are on or not, because it's going to be wind, solar, and sustainable. But if I have to keep chewing out forests, if I have to keep ripping out meadow, if I have to keep expanding our space footprint, that's not sustainable either, right? Particularly as population grows. So one of the things I think that balances the creepiness potentially of your surveillance is, if I can make a better space balance that works for the individual and then rolls up to scale, then that is the greatest long-term benefit of saying, do you need to build a new office building? Or actually, do you have enough space if you change the way people work a little bit, right? Can we make better use of what we've already got? And the answer is absolutely. And one of the things we're seeing is, and COVID had, the quarantine, man, Mira, that's made it very clear. People don't need to be in the office to get shit done. It helps in some cases. What percentage of the help in some cases of any particular person's job is something that you can measure over time and optimize over time. But people are saying, well, I'm spending billions of dollars for real estate. It's the biggest single cost for most large employers. And they're saying, well, shit, I'm still getting stuff done with people not in the office. Why are we using all this space? Do I need to build a new campus? Do I need to rent another building? Do I need to keep doing all this stuff? Or can we go to a much more flexible model that says, these 5 people need to get together when they want to get together. Might be social, might be collaborative, or whatever it is. These monkey minds want to get together, 2 times a week, and they want good coffee, and they want a nice, warm, well-lit room with air exchange that keeps them from giving each other the flu, right? That's the requirement. And can we organize the whole work life to minimize commute, which I think is a huge sustainable problem, minimize the need for new space, maximize your comfort, maximize your collaborative productivity? All that's possible with this kind of data. Are all the answers exactly pinpointed? They aren't, because long-term measurement, kind of playing with the best practices, right? But getting back to your privacy concern, at the end of the day, I believe it's not the job of the company or the government to modify your behavior. It's up to us to give you the tools so that you just naturally do the right thing because you want to. Because again, I believe that people do have an intuitive sense. And if you gave them the tools without showing them graphs, right? So you can't do that. But if I put the data into your hands, I think that you would make better sustainable choices about when you go to work, where you work, who you work with. Is it safe? Is it sustainable? Is it productive? Is it fun? All of those can become part of the focus and helping people collaborate in their life. The analogy I use. No, please.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Interrupt.
The analogy is, go ahead.
The analogy, I'm aware of your time. I can talk for hours about this stuff, but the analogy I use is like the Waze app. You know what that is. The Waze
for
app.
Those of us, for people that might be listening, Waze is a GPS for all intents and purposes, but it's sort of crowd yeah.
That's absolutely right. And what I experience it as is it's a map app, right? And I put in where I'm going and it gives me some choices and routes my drive to optimize it, right? To make it shortest amount of time, which also translates into shortest amount of fuel burned. and shortest amount of my life consumed. And from the employer's perspective, shortest amount of energy wasted, because the commute is a great way to waste employee energy, right? Just you show up to work frustrated because you got stuck on a bridge for 2 hours. I used to do this driving into Boston. And so what Waze does is take a complex amount of data, right? The spatial data from the map, the feedback from people driving, because if you have the Waze app, it's measuring your motions, so it knows when you're on the road and whether you're moving or not moving. It's reporting all that information back, and then it's the self-reporting. Oh, there's an accident. Oh, there's a cop. There's a this or that. It's taking a very complex piece of data. If I gave you all that data in a spreadsheet, there's no way you'd be able to decide where you were going to drive, right? You'd be
No
like,
way.
oh shit, crumble this up. Go the way I usually go, right? Let the chance take over. But Waze kind of folds all that together in a way that just helps me navigate in a natural way. I don't really think about that all that data is going into it. It's just like, yeah, I got there sooner than I would have. I took some roads I normally wouldn't. I'm not sure why. But yeah, I got there in 45 minutes, and I used to take me 2 hours. So I'm pretty happy about that. Now imagine I'm putting all of that together, all the data back into your hands to say, not only what's the fastest route, but what's the best time to do that? What day is the best? What conference room or desk should you reserve because it's available at this time? Because the person or people that you normally work with are also coordinating that. And by the way, we also know that we can heat the building up optimally during this time, or this section will have the lights on, but that section won't. Imagine that whole experience of collaborating what desk you should sit at, what room is available, what people are going to be there when you're there, minimizing your commute, maximizing your comfort, and making best use of space. At the end of the day, that benefits you, it benefits your employer, and it's a much more efficient way of using our resources, space, energy, etc.
I see such a double-edged sword. I really truly do. I mean, I get what you're saying, but when it goes to what room you should be in, what time of day, what desk you should sit at, there is a part of me that just completely cringes. I mean, I get that it's possible to optimize our use of resources uh, in these ways, and I get the beauty of that. I don't minimize it, and I see that, from a utopian and idealistic vantage point, it's perfect. And I see what people do with idealistic ideas. I see how the darker side of humanity manipulates these things to be oppressive and abusive, um, and really eliminate freedoms, and ultimately, like, depending on degree, and I think it is a matter of degree, uh, we become robots.
Yeah.
And at that, I think that this is a very fine line, and I think this is a really, really important conversation, because what is driving that efficiency? The thing that is missing from that is humanity. It's looking at behavioral patterns, but there's no humanity in that. There is no conscience or consciousness. It is data. And I think that that goes to one of the most fundamental challenges of our world today, and our biggest ethical consideration. And it is the choice between freedom and slavery. And it's a very fine line. And this future that you're painting for me, while I see certain benefits, it's horrifying to imagine that I'm going to be told, you go to this room at this time, sit at that desk, this is what you do, and who knows where it goes from there, you know?
And I completely agree with you. By the way, I see all of dystopian side of what you're describing. Absolutely do. And hear it. I spend daily time thinking about it. But I think it hinges on the word told. Like Waze doesn't tell you
Yeah,
exists, and it gives you some
but you're
choices.
talking about employment. And the way that employment currently exists, we are told, or we are expected by our employers to be cogs in a machine. And this is making those cogs all that more machine-like.
I think it goes, and I grant that this is utopian. I absolutely grant that. I think that part of the machine-like feel of it isn't because the humans that are actually employers want it to be that way. Now, there are authoritarians in the world, like I grant that, there absolutely are, and they raise my hackles when I come across them. But I think that mostly people want to do the right thing. Employers, even capitalists, want to balance the profit, which is productivity minus costs, right? It's not rocket science, with doing well. And I think you've interviewed other entrepreneurs who reflect that, right? I don't think it's rare for people who want to do well while doing good. And I think that humans' limited scope at scale is to blame for things beginning to feel like cogs. Because when humans start to think about big problems, the only way they can do it is to boil out the nuance and start thinking about patterns and stamps and cookie cutter and gears. And they think about the human function of a company as a machine because it's the only thing that allows them to scale up their monkey brain to anything like handling that. And I don't think that they want people to feel like they're gears. What they want is for people to do the best work they can with the fewest amount of resources they can expend.
So I just I have to break in because I think that I pray that there is an emergence of uh, the growing emergence of conscious capitalism.
Absolutely.
However, you're talking about multinational organizations on this big scale that have all these things going. The people become like soldiers in an army. They are an asset and they are, I have seen it. I mean, this is the way it's been. Pray that it doesn't continue this way, but they become a commodity. People are a commodity, and this commodifies people even further potentially in that kind of context. Now, I hear the other side of it, but I also see what I see in the world, and I see how much devastation on the planet. I believe all the devastation on the planet has been in the name of money and profit.
Sure.
And these efficiencies are driven by a notion of profit.
Sure.
You know, like it's a financial efficiency, it's a resource efficiency, it's a payroll efficiency, it's a time efficiency. Time is money. Well, no, time is not money. Time and human beings have a limited amount of time.
Sure.
You know, and so what I see as the foundational uh the foundational, I can't think of a better word right now than sin, of our current structure is that we commodify life. We commodify people and nature, and money and profit is the primary thing. Now, I have nothing against making a profit in a context that is not driven by that as its sole motivator.
Sure.
So, I mean, you got me on my soapbox here, and I just see, I see that your intention is good. I see that your intention is driven from this utopian possibility.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I see what happens to so many intentions that are well directed
Sure.
and then get diverted.
Sure.
And so it scares the hell out of me.
Well, it should, because the future is scary. Technology is change, and change always has the possibility to make things worse, right? I mean, that's just the reality of the situation. But we are changing anyway. And I guess I would say, like, Yeah, I mean, you could stop the 30-person company that is microshare, driven by somebody who, frankly, is a musician, is an artist, and worries about privacy daily. Or you can get the same thing from somebody who doesn't. It's not going to be a choice of not having it. I really don't think you will.
Personally, I think we need to limit it, just like we were limiting cloning. You know, like we
Yep.
need to say no. This is not okay. We put a stop to it. Just because we can doesn't mean we should. That, you know, like there is a place to say no, and I'm not sure where that place is,
Yeah,
because I see the value in what you're saying. I really do.
I I think that the place to put the no is on secrecy. It's not the degree, because there are so many ways to cheat. I
So
can tell
here,
you.
yeah, I believe you, but how about, you know, if I have somebody being a peeping Tom in my window and I know that, does that help me?
Um,
I mean, if they know that I know and I know that they're there and they're still there, does that help me? Maybe it gives me the chance to not walk around naked in my house, but
I
look at,
think it does. I think it. I mean, it may not be all the help you need. I grant that, right? Like, there are a lot of moving pieces in the system, right? So you're right. Conscious capitalism needs to grow, um, and we need to figure out how we enforce decency. I, again, I don't like police forces, but you run up against the peeping Tom problem, and the question is, how do you enforce this? I'm a big fan of public shaming, honestly, as a motivator, as a tool, and I think the world has gotten pretty good at wielding the shame stick. What I think they've been really poor at is knowing where to wield it, because I think that um, what we're lacking from the crowd outrage is accurate information that isn't subjective, or part of the kind of gross media machine that manipulates us. But if we had transparency of real data, and there were multiple watchdogs that had access to the data and could interpret it based on their own, I'll just say, biases. Um, and I don't mean it negatively. I mean it in all its senses, right? Good biases, bad biases, weird biases. But if everybody knew, if you could go to whatever body you trust, maybe it's the Sierra Club or Walt Disney World, or um, Capital One, right? Whatever, the ACLU, or the EFF. There are all these organizations. If you could have an appeal to say, I think I'm being peeping Tom. Can you help me with that? Can you use the data to figure that out? And I give you right to use all the data that's been collected about me, and I've got it, but it's a giant spreadsheet, so I don't know what I'm seeing. Use your algorithm to process it and tell me what I should do, or help me act on my behalf. I think it opens the world up to data-based um, watchdogs, data-based conversations, data-based shaming. How would you handle environmental regulation for a polluter? Well, counting on the governments right now is kind of a shaky proposition, right? There are plenty of activists. What those activists lack, I think, are the scope and scale of data to really know, and know in a timely enough way that their action can be, effective. But if I've got environmental sensors spread around an area that can notice changes in air quality in real time, and that I've got the ability to have that information available, not just to government, not just to individuals, not just to employers, but to watchdogs, maybe journalists, maybe environmental groups, who can also look at that and say, you know what, there's a really strange rise in air quality in this area. What the hell is going on? Let's bring additional scrutiny to that. I think a free, open exchange of fundamental physical data, maybe not your behaviors, Mira, right? Not, whether you're naked at your house at this time, right? Like, I grant that's a limit, but if it was temperature, if it was air quality, if it was noise, it was vibration, again, some of these physical characteristics, then I think that, assuming that data wasn't secret, right? That's a big assumption. Assuming that data wasn't
I
secret.
don't want somebody monitoring if I'm snoring at night. I don't want somebody monitoring when I'm watching TV.
Sure.
I don't want that data collected. I do not want people to know if I'm laughing or crying. I do not want that stuff recorded. It
Yep.
is nobody's business.
Yep.
And
Well,
I it's so interesting, because just the other day I started looking at I reset my phone. I reset the settings on my phone because something wasn't working.
yeah.
And all of a sudden I became aware of all these things that it was monitoring that I had no idea it was
Yeah.
monitoring.
Yeah.
And there was one app, the health app, that is monitoring movement to know when you're sleeping or not. And I'm like,
Yep.
no, turn it
Yep.
off, turn it off,
Yep.
And in order to talk to Siri, it's your location.
Yep.
And I mean, on and on.
Yep.
It's really scary to me. I have to
Yeah.
say,
I get it.
I'm a private person.
Yep. I get
I
it.
don't want people knowing my particular habits if I get up at 2 a.m. and I wander around the house. It's nobody's business.
I also think that's generational, though. I agree with you. But my kids don't care. In fact, they go out of their way to share all that information. It's a very different perspective. And what I find frightening about that is that they may inadvertently give up freedoms and not realize they have done so. And my one reaction could be, you got home, put your phone in the microwave, we'll get a Faraday cage, we'll, have a TV that's 20 years old and, keep these listening devices, these video things, because everything is listening to you already. Anything you've bought in the last 5 years absolutely is recording you. It's the problem with it. Number one is it's not transparent. So the idea that you didn't know and now you're aware.
But
Well,
but the thing is too, okay, now I'm aware, but if I want to use Siri, then I'm consenting.
sure.
And it's the same thing like with Google and with all these other services, all the things that we're consenting to.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
frightening.
Yeah.
It's really frightening.
So we have a piece of software, and I don't think I can reassure you, by the way, but we do think a lot about this. So we have a piece of software, there's a white paper I wrote about it called the Digital Ombudsman, which is basically a place that a consumer can go and see all of the data from all of the things that Microshare knows. Now I can't know.
How do we get to that?
It's available on our app console. It's not going to tell you very much because, frankly, well, we're still a small company, right?
So, I see. So it's really just, it's your data. It's not.
Correct.
Okay, gotcha.
It's data that flows through my system.
I gotcha.
So if one day we are the ruler of the data world, or more likely, the same kind of things we're building become adopted more broadly, which is a ton of assumptions, right? A ton of assumptions. Then it would be possible to go to the digital ombudsman, and it is today if you've got one of these on your desk, right? But if you don't have one on your desk, you're not going to see very much on a console. But you could go and see, all right, well, here's all the data. Oh, I see there's temperature data of the room I've been in. There's contacts that have been traced because of the bracelet that I'm wearing for COVID. There's feedback that I provided because this is hanging out outside my door. There's my movements because of the motion sensors. You could see all of that, and then we give privacy controls to say, okay, I'm willing to have this data used in these following ways by these kind of people. So I can say, and I know this is super nerdy and like, who would ever do this, right? I get that. I absolutely get that. But I'll allow HR to see this data, but not marketing. I'll allow facilities to see it, but not HR. I'll allow this kind of information only to be seen in aggregate, not in real time, right? So I don't want you to see if I'm in my house right now, but I will allow you to see when I'm generally in my house. Maybe there's a line and I can control that. Now, when I show you these knobs and dials, you're going to say like what human is going to sit down and understand those knobs and dials because it's complicated and like get it? And my answer is the individuals won't. What I think is eventually the EFF or Sierra Club or some of these watchdog groups will come up with, this is your default policy stance. Here's what we think it does for you. You should just adopt these rules and it will protect you from these kind of things. And you can say, great, I'm gonna adopt, the Apple, the Disney, the, whoever it is you think you trust, the combination. And if you ever want to get to the individual knobs and dials, you can. That's what the digital ombudsman does. And yes, your data might still be collected because you don't control as the employee whether this is on your desk. Frankly, a lot of people rip it off and throw it away, which has its own problems, right? There's a battery in here that shouldn't be in the waste bin. So I don't want you doing that. But I can allow you to hide that information using the ombudsman. And those of us who do care, I think, will be able to see and then inform those around us who maybe should care and don't. And that, I think, is my balance of the good it can do for the world with the trade-off of the individuals, is to give you visibility and give you control and know that there's still plenty of risk involved there. But the greatest risk is that you just don't do it with a company and a technologist that thinks this way, because it's going to get done, because everything's already listening. I don't know how you roll that back because you like Siri, or at least my children like Siri. My children like, their phones. They like the gaming. They're accustomed to the value that ecosystem gives you, and they're unafraid. In many ways, they're unaware.
That's
of
what
the
I think
downside,
it is.
right?
That's
They're
what I
unaware.
think it is.
I agree.
The only reason they're not afraid is because they're not aware.
I agree, and I think that's the natural state of being for most people. And
Well, they've grown up with it, so it's their baseline,
yeah,
and so they don't have a reference point.
yeah, and it's not just people my age. There's plenty who never think about this, right? They go about their day. They got other things to worry about, right? There are those like yourself who do worry and do think, and I think that's smart. I really do. But there's plenty who don't, right? I think the majority just don't, of any age, of any generation. And
I'm wondering what kind of actions we can take to preserve what remains of our freedoms and what remains of our privacy, and how is it possible to roll back some of these intrusions, because they are intrusions.
I do agree with you on that. I don't trust the government to do it. That's my layer. So regulation doesn't work in my mind. So you can merit all the laws you want, but you got to trust the government to have written the law well and to enforce it equally and properly. And I don't see either of those things being done. And I don't see I
wonder, it's interesting because I'm aware of the Green Amendment movement, which is looking to incorporate in the Bill of Rights the right to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And
Sure.
I wonder if we can write in the right to privacy and what that means.
I agree, and I think you can interpret what we already have as including that. But just because you have the right doesn't mean you know how to enforce that right. Because again, you're counting on somebody to help you with the peep and Tom, right? That's the problem.
Exactly.
Like, okay.
Well, this is the real moral issue of our age, I think.
Right. And I
And
agree.
and I think that we're being confronted with that with COVID as well,
Yeah.
as to what is an individual right and what
Yep.
in the collective trumps
Societal
the
good.
individual right.
Absolutely.
And this is a huge consideration, and it's an important philosophical topic. And I think it's going to come to more of a head this year, depending on how the vaccination thing is handled.
I hope it does. My fear is that it won't. It'll be the pressure to go back to normal and put our heads back comfortably into the sand will exert. But I agree with you. I think it's been an accelerant. And I hope it leads us into real good thought and conversation about the topic. Because I think that will be really, I think it's critical to future freedoms. And I don't have any of those answers. Again, I'm not really a musician. I don't have those answers. The only thing I can offer is the light of day. The light of day, I think, fresh air and the light of day is the only thing that I believe will lead to the proper conversations and the proper decisions. By whom will they be made? By whom will they be enforced? I don't know. But broad light of day and awareness, I think that's where it starts. So that's what I spend most of my time thinking about is that part.
Well, Tim, I have to tell you, this has been an amazing interview. And I just want to thank you for being with us, and for everybody listening. I just want to thank you. Please think deeply about these questions. This is the really important thing for our time and for our future. And I want to thank Scott Billy, my co-founder and the producer of Sustainability Now. And I think that's it for today. So until next time, live your best life, love the world around you, and together we can save the world.
Thank you for listening to Sustainability Now. Visit sustainabilitynow.global to find resources related to today's program. While you're there, pledge your support by making a contribution to help us shape a world that works. And remember to subscribe, share, and follow us on social media.